Have you ever felt a bump in the night? Felt like something was watching you? Felt like something had touched you? Or seen a shadow out of the corner of your eye move through your house? Hi, this is Uncle Jimmy with Jimmy's Train Station and Travel Adventures. And today we are doing a video here in Gettysburg, which is considered one of the most haunted cities in America. In 3 days, in July 1st, 2nd, and 3rd of 1863, the Battle of Gettysburg was fought here in the Civil War. There were over 51,000 casualties, including wounded, killed, or missing in action. I'm standing out here close to the first day's battlefield, and I'm going to be telling you some scary stories, ghost stories, that was passed down. Some of them comes from Mark Nesbitt's book, Ghost of Gettysburg, and his movies. Some of them is my own personal experience from living here since 2012. Our first ghost story starts with a man named John Reynolds. He was a major general with the Union Army that arrived early on the second day's battle here in Gettysburg. He had met with John Buford over there at the seminary in the cupola. Buford was looking out of the cupola, and John Reynolds looks up at Buford and says, "What goes here?" And John Buford looks down at him and says, "There's going to be a devil to pay." Because by this time, on the first day, the Confederate Army had pushed the Union Army back to Seminary Ridge, where the school and the seminary is, which is off in the distance there over the horizon. But here on this day, it was the first day after he had talked to John Reynolds, he came out here. So it was the first day that the Confederate Army came from these woods, mostly Alabama boys, and pushed the Union Army back to Seminary Ridge. So they joined forces here to try to hold the Confederates back. Now, John Reynolds was a major general. He had just he was feeling high in the saddle because he was just offered the whole command of the Union Army, the whole brigade, which went to General Grant, because Major General Reynolds happened to die right here the first day within 15 minutes of the battle. He was sitting on his horse on this exact spot right here. The Union Army was pushed back from McPherson's barn, which is over there, this way through the woods. It was mostly Michigan and Wisconsin boys fighting in this area, which was known as the Iron Brigade. Reynolds was part of that brigade he was commanding. So Major General was sitting on his horse. As the Confederates was pushing through these woods, he looked over his left shoulder into this direction to check on his men who were being pushed back and make sure that they were keeping a straight line as they routed and retreated this way into the town of Gettysburg. When he looked back, he was shot in the back of the neck, fell off his horse to this ground here. His men come and checked on him. One of the cavalry soldiers put his hand up under Reynolds' neck, looked at his glove, and there was blood on it. So he had been shot right into the spine and the back of the neck and died instantly. He was only like 30 years old. He was engaged to be married. He was from Lancaster, Pennsylvania, which is not far from here, and he is buried today in Lancaster, Pennsylvania. He was the highest ranking officer killed on the battlefield of the Battle of Gettysburg. So I'm going to tell you a ghost story about General Reynolds that happened right here in Gettysburg, and many more stories. So follow me as we go on this adventure of ghost tales and stories from Gettysburg. We're now standing on Steinwehr Avenue off of Baltimore in the town of Gettysburg. And this building here is now a photo shop. It's called Servants Old Time Photos. And this is the original building that was here during the battle. Now, after General Reynolds was killed, his body was actually brought to this building, which was then a permanent residence. So it was someone's home. And it says right here, on July 1st, 1863, General Reynolds was the first Union general killed in the Battle of Gettysburg. He was carried by aides to this house. Now here's the way the story goes. This happened in the early 80s. There was an older gentleman and his middle-aged daughter who had come to Gettysburg to check out the battlefield and the history of the Battle of Gettysburg. And they were doing window shopping late in the evening when all the stores were closed, because they were looking to see what they could find in the shop so they could shop for the next day. So they were peering into the windows. Now here is a photograph of General John Reynolds. So they were peering into the door here of this photo shop. And what they seen, they thought was very bizarre. So as you can see, there is an opening right there. Hopefully you can see in there, the doorway there. Through the doorway, they seen a lady sitting by candlelight in a chair. And in front of the lady, about where that table is, was a podium with a casket with black draped over the table, and in the casket was a Union officer who appeared to be dead. Now they thought this was very bizarre to see such a sight. They actually thought it was wax figures that they were looking at, and it was a display. So the very next day, this was the first shop they came to. Now when they went in, and there was no longer an opening like that, there was a black curtain hanging there. And so they questioned the lady that was running the shop here and asked her why there was such a bizarre wax figure setup behind the curtain there and what it was all about. And the lady explained to him, well, this is a photo shop, we don't have wax figures here. And she had pulled back the curtain and showed them that there was nothing there. Well, this shocked them from what they seen. So what they had really seen was like a time capsule, a glimpse into time, and had seen what they would have seen in the evening when John Reynolds was brought here on July 1st, 1863, of the caretaker sitting with the body of John Reynolds before he was moved to Lancaster to be buried. So this is a ghost story. It comes out of Mark Nesbitt's Ghost of Gettysburg, and it dates back to the 1980s, like I said, but it happened in this building. Now, as of today, there used to be a wooden piece here on the doorway that actually had John Reynolds' blood stain where it dripped on the wood as they took his body in. And if you go under the foundation of this house, back there where that table is, where his body was laid in the casket, there is blood stain on the wood underneath the foundation of this building to this day of John Reynolds. So I hope you're enjoying these stories, and if you are, please, I ask if you go to my channel, Jimmy's Train Station and Travel Adventures, and subscribe to my channel if you haven't already, and give it a thumbs up. Feel free to leave comments, suggestions of other things you'd like to see. So now we are going to go to our next stop, of some more ghost stories. And along with these ghost stories, I'm going to tell you my own personal experience I've had myself at this next location. So follow me on this adventure. So across the street, we're standing in front of the historical Farnsworth House. It's a bed and breakfast and tavern owned by Mr. Schultz and his family here in Gettysburg. This is believed to be the 5th most haunted bed and breakfast in America. Now, it's known to hold a number of ghosts. From a little boy named Jeremy, to a midwife, to Mr. Sweeney, who used to own the home, to a spirit named Walter, who was a Confederate soldier who was shot through the throat on the back porch. As you can see in the front of the house, and if you watch another video I did on this, we did a ghost tour of this same house with the bullet holes in the side of it. And the attic window on the side here at the top, which is believed to be the window that a sharpshooter, Confederate sharpshooter, shot out of towards Cemetery Hill, which is this way. And up on the left is the Jenny Wade house, which was the only civilian killed in the Battle of Gettysburg. She was 20 years old. She was baking bread behind 2 doors, which is probably about a 200 yards, 300 yard shot. He was aiming at the doorknob of the house because he had seen Union soldiers coming in and out and thought it was a headquarters and maybe there was an officer inside, which wasn't true. It was a civilian 20-year-old Jenny Wade baking bread for the wounded, which was gathering around the outside of her house. The bullet went from that window through the front door, through the kitchen door that goes into the bedroom, which she was standing behind because she thought she would be safe, hit her back, went through her heart, and lodged in her corset as she fell dead to the floor. 20 years old, the only civilian killed in the Battle of Gettysburg. Now, I have been in that Jenny Wade house and experienced my own thing that happened to me. They say it's haunted. The chains will move in front of the displays. Her father is known to haunt the bottom and to the cellar where her body was carried. But as I was climbing the stairs from the kitchen where she was shot one day, I heard a female scream. But the scream sounded faint and distant, like it was in another time. I believe it was her sister screaming as she found her sister dead lying on the floor, because it was her sister's home. Jenny actually lived up the street here in another home with her mother, who was a seamstress, but was visiting her sister's home down here at the time of the battle because her sister was pregnant with child and about to give birth, so she was help taking care of her sister. So that's the one story of the Farnsworth House here. Now, I actually worked here myself as a tour guide on a history tour called In Their Shoes. And we would take the bus tour around the front here, tell them the history of the house. It was occupied by the 44th Georgia in the attic, where they were using that window in the attic there as sharpshooters. Now, I have experienced my own things happening here. I was a skeptic till I moved to Gettysburg and witnessed my own things to happen. So I'm gonna go over here on the bench and sit and tell you a few of those stories. This is Mr. G's ice cream, the best ice cream in town here, and it's right across the street from the Farnsworth House if you're ever here, and it's right on Baltimore Street. It comes out of this circle at the center of the town. This here is a witness tree that was here during the battle, and the same for the one over there. Was known that Abraham Lincoln stopped here as he was riding this direction to the cemetery to give his Gettysburg address in November of 1863, the same year after the battle, that he had stopped and actually placed his hand on that tree over there and actually stopped and talked to the civilians before he got back in the wagon, went further up the street there to the cemetery where he gave his dedication. But let's get back to our ghost stories here. So as I said, I was a tour guide here, and part of my tour, the first half, was to go into the attic of the house and take my tour up there of 20-30 people, sometimes only 10, just depending on how big the bus was, and tell them what happened up there. Now up in the attic they got benches, like baseball or football benches in high school, or gymnasium benches more like, where the spectators or the guests actually sit and listen to the stories. And then they have a display with actual Civil War items in glass cases lit up that is behind the storyteller, which is me, which I would sit in a bench in front of the people and told them the stories. Now I've done an investigation here at night and have got a lot of evidence. I've got EVPs of a man growling. I've got EVPs of women's voices. My friend Jack, I used to ghost hunt with me, was on that, and we used a one of the ones that lights up. I can't remember what they're called, but it shows if there's energy there. I've lost for words for the name of it. But we was testing in one of the haunted rooms, which is the head mistress or the housemaid of the house spirit, her room, and I had it lying on the bed, and I kept asking her questions, and every time she would respond and it would light up to green. But more evidence than that, I've seen skirts, like Civil War dresses, go around corners when there's no one in the house. I was doing a tour in the attic and actually got a moan behind the bench where the bodies were taken to. As they were being shot, they were dragged to the back corner on this side of the attic and piled up. I believe there's 3 gentlemen who died up there from the 44th. But we got a moan. It was like, oh, like in pain, and it was right there with us, and my crowd kind of looked at me funny, but at the time I was used to it. I said, it's just the boys, don't worry about it. And I explained the whole situation of what happened up there. Another thing that happened to me is very bizarre. I always went up to the attic and I would check and make sure the lights were on and everything was ready. It got hot up there, so I'd turn the fan on, because it was summertime when I was doing this. I was in full uniform, Civil War uniform. I checked everything. I even looked over at the sharpshooter window to make sure everything was good there. Seen nothing. Now keep in mind, we have a lock, and it's a numbered lock that rolled, and there was only 2 tour guides at the time. It was me and my friend Buddy, and he was in Maryland at this time visiting his dad. So we were the only 2 that knew the combination to this lock, because as tour guides we each had our own lock. The ghost team that did the ghost tours had their own locks also, so we would take this lock off and switch it with the other tour people. So to make a long story short, I went and checked everything, locked it back up, went to the back of the building over here, met my bus, come out front, gave them the whole spiel of the history of the house. We went up into the attic, got everybody seated, got comfortable, sit down, and I started to proceed to tell my stories. Now, as I was explaining what had happened up there and giving a little history first of the 44th Georgia, I pointed toward the window to tell them about the sharpshooter's nest and how they lied on their stomach to shoot out the window. And what I seen made me jump, and my audience kind of looked at me funny, but in the window, in the dust, someone had written with a finger in the dust and wrote, "Hi, James." Well, that was my name. That's my name, James. And I swear to you, just 30 minutes prior when I was up there, it wasn't there. So I feel that the boys left me a message and got used to me and was saying hello. Now, my last story of this house is they do a cellar tour down in the cellar across there. It's like an hour long, and they tell you ghost stories and about the ghost of the house and Walter. And I believe I seen Walter, and the people who work there never mentioned him by name because he's kind of an upset spirit that died here, and he's got a thing against women for some reason. But we always called him W. We wouldn't actually mention his name. So I'm sitting clear in the back. There's a stairwell that goes up to the dining room. Out of this solid wall right here on the left, which I could only explain it come out of mid-air because there's nothing on this side of the wall. There's like a foot thick wall. This figure came out of the wall, a black shadow person. You can make out it was a big person. It was all in black, and it looked like a floppy hat, like a Confederate slouch hat. At first it would just bend out of the wall and look down at me, and I was sitting there in my general's uniform and looking up. I kind of snickered and waved at it because at this time I was used to spirits and seeing them, and the people who was sitting right next to me also seen it. So I don't believe in mass hallucination. And we would watch this figure come in and out of the wall and walk back and forth to the door to the dining room and look down each time. This lasted about 10 minutes. And we sit there and we're like, are you seeing this? And everybody agreed on what they saw. Well, I had a friend from Ohio, and she was out visiting at the time. And she asked me what I was seeing, so I told her, and she goes, I don't believe you. So I said, come back and watch. So she come back and sat at the third step looking up, and she goes, I don't see nothing, Jimmy. I don't see nothing, because that's what most of my friends call me. That's why I go by Uncle Jimmy. As I'm looking up, and she goes, I don't see anything. I'm like, Sandy, just keep watching, keep watching. About that time, the shadow came out again and looked down at her, and she let out a scream that would shake everybody down there. The tour guide that was down there said, what's going on? So we explained what we was seeing, and he just wanted to get out of there. He goes, okay, it's time to leave. So we all gathered up out of there and continued our tour across over to Cemetery Hill, where they used to take you, which is not allowed no more, but would tell ghost stories over there because it's supposedly haunted too. So them are just some of the stories and things I experienced when I worked there myself. So I hope you're enjoying these stories and are watching this. And like I said, if you do, please subscribe to my channel if you haven't. I'm always looking for new subscribers. It helps me grow. It's absolutely free at no cost to you. I just appreciate the subscribers and the followers. I enjoy putting these videos out for you and these stories. Now this here is, like I said, the ice cream shop here, and you can see there's bullet holes in here too from the battle. There's a lot of scars and a lot of buildings here in town. There was actually a gentleman who was shooting out of here. There was it's called in this twin houses. There's one that sit across the street here that caught on fire during a storm and burnt down. But there were Union soldiers in that one and Confederate in this one. And right in that doorway at the top, there was a gentleman, a Confederate sharpshooter, shooting out of that doorway, hiding behind a desk, and was shot through the chest and died right in that doorway instantly. The desk is actually in the museum up here, just up that yellow house there, which is now like a children's museum, but they do have that desk on display with the bullet hole in it. So all these buildings and stuff, the whole town is haunted. People, when they come to Gettysburg, they seem to think that the battlefield is the only place that the battle was fought, and it's just not true. It's 25 square miles here, a battlefield, and they actually fought right through town here. So everywhere in them 25 miles, and even on the outskirts, is all battlefield. So and actually over there is a middle school here where my daughter goes to school. My son goes to the elementary. But back there's a football field, and they actually found bodies, Confederate bodies, buried out there by that tree, that big tree that sits out there. There was a L-shaped spot where they found like 30 Confederate bodies. And then when they were building the bleachers, they actually found bodies. And there's a pond further back in the woods there that was a burial pit for bodies, and they were actually taking the bodies out of there, and at the time it was just a burial pit and no pond, and they hit a natural spring and water started filling in, so there's still a couple bodies in that pond that they were never recovered. Now the Louisiana Tigers charged right through the schools here and right up the Cemetery Hill against the Ohio boys, and my buddy actually took a picture up this road and caught an apparition all white of a soldier standing there on the road. Now there's an old tale I'm going to tell you here about the middle school here, and a story that was told by a teacher. So the story goes, they were doing final exams. It was almost the end of the year, summertime. And I believe it was a 7th or 8th grade teacher had her class there. I'm not sure what kind of teacher she was, but they're sitting there, and this comes from a teacher telling the story of another teacher. So they were sitting there taking their exams. It was really quiet. And what happened, the teacher let the class go and gave them all A's because they were all shocked at what happened to them, and it scared the teacher so bad. She goes, all right class, don't worry about the rest of the exam, you all get A's, enjoy your summer, we'll see you next year. And the story was passed around that as they were sitting there, all at once in the middle of the classroom, through the wall, solid wall, right through the middle of class toward the teacher, came running an apparition of a Confederate soldier carrying a gun, screaming his lungs out, running right through the middle of the class. And when it got close to the teacher's desk, it just disappeared into a mist of red, and then all was silent. It shocked everyone who's seen it, even the students. Now the funny story about that is I've heard about in battle of soldiers who were crossing the battlefield like that and was hit directly by a cannon, and what happens is they would turn into a red mist of blood, because I mean it would just explode, and there would be nothing left, and that's all you'd see is just like a spray of red. So it's an interesting story. I don't know if that one's true, but I would certainly believe it, living here in Gettysburg for 12 years and the things I've seen, and I know that it's real, and I know that this town is very haunted. So, you know, with all that happened here and all the energy was released, it doesn't surprise me. So follow me, we're heading over to another spot, and I'll tell you the story when we get there. So follow me. So we begin this story on Baltimore Street here as it goes out the edge of town to Cemetery Hill up to the cemetery. And the brick tall building in front of us is a haunted location known as the Homestead Orphanage Home. I'm going to give you a little history on this before we actually tell you the ghost story. So the facility was created by Dr. John F. Bournes after fundraising resulting from the identification of a Battle of Gettysburg casualties' children as Amos Humiston in 1867. Ulysses S. Grant was photographed with orphans at the entrance of this building. And in 1870, Pennsylvania bill was used to fund the facility. So this was a home that was established for orphans from Civil War veterans that had fought and died and had no families. The beginning history of the homestead was prosperous, but after initial headmistress was replaced by a woman named Rosa J. Carmichael, the history of the orphanage and her strange disciplinary who created a dungeon for disciplinary children. The dungeon, along with stories that accompanied him, made the homestead notorious. Eventually the orphanage was turned into the Soldiers National Museum that once owned by actor Cliff Arquette. who narrated tours of the building, especially the dungeon. However, the museum has been closed to the public since November of 2014. Now, they do hold ghost things in the basement, and it has been investigated by the team called Ghost Adventures, which is Zach's team, and then they have been also investigated by Ghost Hunters, which is part of the TAPS team. But there is hauntings here, they say, of children. There's a cave-like room in the bottom of the basement where she would lock and chain kids to the walls. The pit is there to be viewed where she actually would chain them to the walls. She was very mean. It's said that she even killed some children and buried them. Now, that's just rumor, but not known. But when they found out about these stories, they went to prosecute Rosa. She fled town and disappeared, and nobody ever seen her again. So she got away with all this cruel and unusual discipline of these children, and was very mean to the children. But this is going to lead us to another location that's also haunted, that has to do with this orphanage itself. So that will be our next stop over at the college campus. So follow me on this adventure. So here we are on the College of Gettysburg campus, founded in 1832. So it was here way before the battle that was fought in 1862. But we're standing here in front of what is known as Stevens Hall. Now this is housing for female students that go to college here. And there is a nice statue here of Abraham Lincoln signing the Emancipation Proclamation January 1st of 1863 and putting it into law. But the story I'm about to tell you involves the orphanage that we was just at, and the mean headmistress of Miss Carmichael. Now it's said that some female students here were hiding and a young boy of like 8 or 9 from this orphanage, because they heard stories of how mean she was to the children. So they were actually hiding this boy in their dorm, in their room. Well, somehow Miss Carmichael had found out and came and knocked on the door of the girls. Well, they had to hide the boy really quick. So the story goes that, I'm not sure if it's this side or the other side of the building, but on the 3rd story of this building, you see they have ledges, little cement ledges. Now they'll remind you that this was in the dead of winter, so they didn't really have anywhere to hide the boy, so they put him outside the window and had him stand on the edge. Now Miss Carmichael had drilled these girls for like an hour. The whole time these girls was worried about the little boy who was standing on the outside of the edge in the cold of winter, wondering if he was okay. So after they had left, they hurried, and after she left, they hurried and opened the curtains to check on the little boy, which he was no longer standing there. They came outside here to check to see if he had fallen, and there was no sign of him, which is a strange story itself. Could he have been a spirit himself? They don't know. Or did he just actually fall in the snow and wandered off and died somewhere? Nobody really knows, but they never found a body. But the story goes of the students that stay here now, who live in that room, every once in a while they will look out the window and there will be a face of blue, like of a frozen, like cold, in a little shivering boy's face. They, as known as the blue boy now, will haunt that window up there, one of these windows, and that's what they see. They see this apparition of this little boy with a blue face, like he's frozen, staring back at them into the window, and then will disappear. So this is one story of this building that has to do with the orphanage. They've also seen a young lady who come running out of the closet out of nowhere, dressed in Civil War clothes of the time. So this is one story here on campus. It's known as the Blue Boy. So follow me on this adventure, and I'll take you to a couple more sites here on campus of some more ghost stories as we continue this adventure. Follow me. So I have a couple short stories here of ghost stories here on campus, and we're still on the Gettysburg campus. This building here is known as Pennsylvania Hall, and it's used as administrative now. But at the time of battle and stuff, it was used as a lookout with the cupola area up on top, and also a Civil War hospital. Now it's said at the cupola sometimes you will get a ghostly appearance of a sentinel walking around with a rifle on top, and a number of people have seen this in the past. Now I've never seen it, but they said that it has been seen. Now the people that work here at Pennsylvania Hall work hard and long hours because they're administrative for the college. But there's a story that goes along with this building, that one day the ladies were going to lunch, and there was 3 women, and they got in the elevator of this building, and they pushed from the first floor, from the 4th floor, to go down, to come out, or to go to lunch. Well, what happened is the elevator kept going down to the bottom, which is the basement of the building. Now in the basement, it's used for more offices and office spaces, so it's got cubicles and gray carpet. But when the door opened, that is not what the ladies seen. It opened actually into a very disturbing scene of a Civil War hospital, with men screaming and blood everywhere and doctors sawing off legs and stuff. And the ladies were shocked at this, and they screamed in amazement of what they were seeing. As they looked into this ghostly image of this field hospital being surgery being done, and this guy getting his leg amputated, the doctor turned toward them and motioned for them to come in, like beckoning them to help him in this terrible task that he was continuously stuck in, of this hospital scene. So the ladies panically pushed the button of the elevator door, and finally the doors closed and the elevator went up to the 1st floor. Well, they told security here of what happened and what they had seen. So security right away went in the elevator and went to the basement. Now when the door opened up to the basement, all he seen was office, like nothing had ever happened. But I believe this story because I don't think these ladies would lie about what they seen. So it's almost like they stepped into the past and seen what had happened here. An eerie ghost story for sure, but a very interesting ghost story. We're going to one more location here on campus, and that's just over here across the way to this brick looking building, and I'll tell you the story when we get over there. So follow me on this adventure. So here we're standing in front of the Klein Theater, and it's another building here on campus, part of the arts department of the college. And this is where the art students do their plays and practice for their plays here at the college. And this is another story from Martin Nesbitt's Ghost of Gettysburg. The story goes that one day the students were on stage practicing for a play, and what had happened is, all at once one of the students noticed something sitting on the stage. So they look over, all of them, and what they see is a Civil War Confederate general sitting on the empty chair on stage, just sitting there reading a book, minding his own business, not paying any attention to what they're doing, but just sitting there in his own time reading a book, or like orders of something. And they said the spirit looked a lot like Lee, General Robert E. Lee, white bearded general, sitting there on stage reading a book, and then it just disappeared right before their eyes. And that's the story that goes along with this building. So So I hope you've enjoyed these stories today of ghost sightings and things that's happened here in Gettysburg. And once again, I'm Uncle Jimmy with Jimmy's Train Station and Travel Adventures. So if you're watching this, please subscribe to my channel. Give it a thumbs up. Feel free to leave comments and suggestions of other things you'd like to see in the future. Till then, next time, go out and have your own adventures in life and enjoy life. And once again, this has been Uncle Jimmy with Jimmy's Train Station and Travel Adventures. Till next time, goodbye.